Meu nome John, tenho 58 anos. Eu que vou cantar a canticho uma noite solitária na famosa Rota 66, no Arizona. Eu transportava uma carga de antiguidades para a museu na Califórnia. A noite era incrivelmente escura, sem lua e com poucas estrelas visíveis através da fina camada de nuvens. O vento levava pelo deserto, levantando poeira e areia que obscureciam ainda mais a visão. A Rota 66, outrora movimentada, agora era trecho quase abandonado, com trecos marinas e pouquíssimos sinais de civilização. Naquela noite, a solidão era quase palpável. O radio só captava estática, e o silêncio na cabine era perturbador. A sensação de estar isolado do mundo era intensa, como se eu estivesse em outro planeta. Próximo ao antigo posto de gasolina abandonado, avisti, à beira da estrada, uma figura solitária. Parecia homem, parado sob a luz fraca de posto enferrujado. Instantivamente, reduzi a velocidade. As I got closer, I could see that the figure was wearing an old gas station attendant's uniform, with an illegible identification plate. He remained motionless, staring at the road. I stopped the truck a few meters away and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the howl of the wind. I got out of the cabin, cautiously, and approached the figure. When he was just a few steps away from him, a strong wind blew, stirring up dust and revealing the man's face. He was pale with deep, sad eyes. An expression of deep melancholy marked his face. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt an inexplicable fear, as if I were facing a ghost. Without saying a word, the man pointed to the abandoned gas station. I looked at the station and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the dusty window, I could see the reflection of a terrible accident, with twisted cars and fallen bodies. The scene was horrible, as if time had gone backwards. I ran back to the truck, got into the cab, and accelerated as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the man and his reflection were gone. Only the abandoned post and the darkness remained. I never passed that stretch of Route 66 again, without remembering that night. The figure of the gas station attendant and the reflection of the accident haunt me to this day.
My name is Rick, I'm 42 years old, and the story I'm about to tell took place on a rainy night on a forest road in Oregon. He transported logs to a sawmill on the coast. The road was narrow and winding, cutting through a dense pine forest. The rain was falling heavily, and the low fog made visibility difficult. The truck's headlights could barely illuminate a few meters ahead. That night, the forest seemed alive, with trees swaying in the wind and shadows dancing in the fog. An oppressive silence hovered over the region, broken only by the sound of rain and the roar of the engine. As I approached a sharp bend, I saw a dark figure in the middle of the road. It looked like a large animal standing still. I slowed down cautiously. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal, but an old wagon, parked in the middle of the road. There were no horses or any signs of life around. I stopped the truck a few meters away and got out of the cab. I approached the cart, feeling intensely cold. The wood was old and rotted, and the wheels creaked in the wind. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps coming from the forest. I looked around, but I didn't see anything. The footsteps got closer and closer. An irrational fear invaded me. I ran back to the truck and sped off, leaving the cart behind. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a tall, dark figure come out of the woods and look at me. I never went down that road again. The ghost wagon and the figure in the forest haunt me to this day. My name is Jonas, I'm 50 years old, and this story happened one fall night on the Maryland coast while I was hauling a load of fresh seafood. The fog was so thick that it seemed to swallow everything, and the sound of waves hitting the shore created an even more gloomy atmosphere. I was driving down the narrow coastal road, with the Chesapeake Bay lighthouse on my right, its dim light trying to penetrate the fog. With each turn of the lighthouse, the landscape briefly revealed itself, showing the dark waves and rocky shore. That night, the radio was silent, and the silence was interrupted only by the noise of the engine and the sound of the waves. A feeling of isolation invaded me, as if I were alone in the world. As I approached a sharp bend, I saw a solitary figure on the side of the road. It looked like a man, standing with his back to me, looking out to sea. I slowed down, curious. As I got closer, I could see that the figure was wearing a yellow raincoat and a fisherman's hat. He remained motionless, as if hypnotized by the sea. I stopped the truck a few meters away and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I got out of the cabin and approached the figure. When he was just a few steps away, a strong wind blew, momentarily blowing away the fog. I could see the man's face. He was pale with hollow eyes as if he were dead. An expression of deep sadness and anguish marked his face. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt an inexplicable fear, as if I were facing a specter. Without saying a word, the man pointed to the lighthouse. I looked at the lighthouse and saw something that froze my blood. At the top of the tower, a red light flashed intermittently, a sign of danger at sea. But there was no ship in sight. I ran back to the truck and sped off as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the man was gone. Only the fog and the red light remained. I never passed that road again without remembering that night. The figure of the man and the red light in the lighthouse haunt me to this day. My name is Marcos, I'm 48 years old, and this story takes place on a hot, dry night in Texas, while I was transporting cattle to a ranch in the interior of the state. The landscape was arid, with little vegetation and many deserted areas. I was driving down a country road, with the starry sky above me. The heat was intense, even at night, and the hot wind blew through the cabin's open window. That night, the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the noise of the engine and the sound of the tires on the dirt road. A feeling of loneliness and isolation invaded me, as if I were lost in the middle of nowhere. As I approached a bend, I saw the lights of a ranch in the distance. It looked like an abandoned place, with dark windows and a crumbling fence. I slowed down, curious. As I got closer, I could see that the ranch was even older and more run down than it looked from a distance. The walls were cracked, the roof had collapsed in some places, and vegetation was growing wildly around it. I stopped the truck in front of the entrance gate and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was even deeper. I got out of the cabin and approached the gate. When I was close enough, I heard a strange noise coming from inside the ranch. It sounded like footsteps and whispers. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked inside the ranch and saw something that scared me. On the porch of the main house, there were several dark figures, standing still and motionless. They seemed to be watching me. I ran back to the truck and sped off as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the figures were gone. Only the abandoned ranch and darkness remained. I never went down that road again. The abandoned ranch and dark figures haunt me to this day. My name is Pedro, I'm 55 years old, and this story happened on a cold, foggy night in a forest in California, while I was transporting antique furniture for a private collector. The road was winding and narrow, cutting through a dense forest of giant sequoias. The fog was so thick that it looked like a white veil, and visibility was almost nil. The silence was absolute, broken only by the noise of the engine and the rustle of leaves in the trees. That night, the forest seemed alive, with the gigantic trees rising like ghosts in the fog. A feeling of oppression and mystery invaded me, as if I were being watched by something invisible. As I approached a clearing, I saw, in the middle of the road, a figure dressed in white. It looked like a woman, standing motionless in the fog. I slowed down cautiously. As I got closer, I could see that the figure was wearing a long, flowing white dress. She remained motionless, her face covered by a veil. I stopped the truck a few meters away and turned off the engine. The silence was even deeper now. I got out of the cabin and approached the figure. When he was close enough, a strong wind blew, momentarily blowing away the fog. I could see the woman's face. He was pale and lifeless, with empty, sad eyes. A deep fear invaded me. I felt like I was facing a ghost. Without saying a word, the woman stretched out her hand and pointed towards the forest. I looked in the direction she was pointing and saw something that terrified me. In the middle of the trees, there were several other figures dressed in white, standing still and motionless, as if they were waiting for something. I ran back to the truck and sped off as fast as I could. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the woman and the other figures were gone. Only the fog and giant trees remained. I never went through that forest again. The woman in white and the other figures haunt me to this day.